shows Joe Biden once again doing extremely well there. This is such a fluid, exciting race on the Democratic side.
Yeah, you see Mayor Pete jumping up in the Iowa polling. He's at 25%. Then you see South Carolina. You have Joe Biden with a big lead and Mayor Pete, again, having lots of trouble with African-American voters. We'll get into all that in just a moment. But let's begin today, kicking off week 2 of public testimony in the impeachment probe. We'll get into who will be testifying in just a moment. But first, the latest ABC News Ipsos poll shows where Americans are now on this issue. 70%, 70, think the president's actions with Ukraine were wrong. Only 25% think they were not. Among those who think his actions were wrong, 51% think he should be impeached and removed from office. 6% think the president should be impeached but not removed from office, and 13% think he should not be impeached or removed from office. And in the new NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll out just this morning, 50% believe the president should be impeached, 43% do not. 70% in this poll think it is unacceptable for a president to ask a foreign leader to investigate a political opponent. 22% think it is acceptable. 65% say new information that comes from the impeachment inquiry could not sway their position. 30% say it could, and 63% of people responding say they are following the news of the impeachment inquiry very closely or fairly closely, as opposed to 37% who say they are not following closely or not at all. A lot of numbers in there, Joe, but basically you've got 70% of the country thinks something is very wrong here.
Yeah, 75%, which actually doesn't that undercut everything Donald Trump's been saying? I mean, perfect call, perfect transcript. Not a transcript, but if it were a transcript, perfect transcript. No, the American people are speaking out in a way that they usually don't, these polls. Yeah. And they are saying it is wrong for him to try to use his influence to start an investigation in a foreign country of a political opponent. That's pretty straightforward. And there's nothing Donald Trump can tweet about or say in speeches that'll change that one bit. Americans have decided their president let them down. Now the question is whether it's impeachable.
And it may point to at least why you see sort of the Republican argument morphing to, yeah, I didn't love this. This wasn't great. I don't think as a general matter, presidents shouldn't trade political dirt for military aid. But I don't think he should be removed from office. That seems to be where Republicans have moved. There's no credible, with all the witnesses we've heard, the witnesses we'll hear from today, there's no way anymore to say this thing didn't happen and that it was okay if it did. People are just saying on the Republican side, I don't think he should be removed from office for it.
Well, you've seen the evolution of the strategy of the Republican defense. Phase 1, process argument, complain about the process, which is always a loser because Americans don't care about a process argument. No. They shifted to, oh, well, it wasn't firsthand. It's so far removed.
Hearsay.
It's third.
Lindsey Graham's new definition of whether hearsay evidence is admissible or not. That was fun for the Senate Judiciary Chairman to hear him rewrite that.
Lasted for a bit, and then you have one of the ambassador's aides in Ukraine bring up, well, actually, I was hanging out with Gordon Sondland in a restaurant. Yeah. In Kyiv, and I always am trying to say, I'm thinking Skiev now that we all pronounce it Kyiv.
I was going to say, we have to say Kyiv now.
I know, it's Kiev. I know, I think chicken Kiev, but
come on,
not to be insulting.
Is in the Ukraine.
Yes.
All right, there you go.
So you got Gordon Sondland holding the phone out from his head because Donald Trump speaks so loud, which might be able to testify to. Loud talker on the phone. And so now we've landed at the third line of defense, which is, yeah, this all might have happened, but it really wasn't that big of a deal, and we can't impeach in an election year, one more year, just vote him out of office.
You know, if Republicans had been smart from the very beginning, of course, that's a big if, they would have just jumped to the end saying, yeah, it's really bad what he did, really bad. But it's not an impeachable offense. But, Guy, we've gotten to a point now where there is that drip day in and day out, where Republicans set up a straw man, it gets knocked down the next day. They set up another straw man, knocked down the next day. Americans have been seeing this over the past month now, and it's having a real impact in the president's approval ratings. You dig into the numbers every day as much as anybody in America about what this will mean politically in the 2020 races. When you look at those numbers, I'm curious what you think about the 30% that say they can still be swayed by the impeachment evidence. Where is that going to play out in 2020, not just in the presidential race, but also in the Senate and the House races?
So interestingly enough, one of the most relevant things from the ABC poll was the fact that 21% of Americans said that they made their mind up about impeachment after the first week of hearings. And of those Americans, 6 out of every 10 said they favored impeachment and removal from office. So here you have 1 out of every 5 Americans saying they paid attention. And then of those, 60% said they favored not just impeachment, but impeachment and removal. I think this is a troubling sign. And it rebuts this idea that the hearings didn't have enough pizzazz or they weren't interesting enough. You know, 58% of Americans say they are following the hearings somewhat or very closely. And by the way, I expect some of the most combustible testimony is still yet to come. Yeah. And we've seen that from the transcripts that have been released. And certainly, I think everybody is waiting for Ambassador Sondland's hearing, because I think it's going to reveal a lot more about the nature of what happened in Ukraine.
Yeah, Al, you know, Guy's point about witnesses still to come. Lieutenant Colonel Vindeman today, be a powerful witness. A couple more powerful witnesses this week. But the numbers alone that we've been talking about here this morning, the 60% or 75%, whichever number you pick in terms of people want, you know, let's impeach him and remove him, the combination of those, that's done in the wake of a president who has flooded the field each and every day with lies. And people, an enormous amount of people, clearly, have fought through the lies and said, no, he's got to go.
When you look at the fact that they are not only saying impeach him, but remove him, when you get to the Republicans' argument now, well, it doesn't rise to impeachable, he may have done it. The public has already gone beyond that, because they've said remove him, which means they say, yes, it is impeachable and removable. That's one. And I think, secondly, as you're right, when we see the real witnesses coming on this week that could really, in my opinion, put the nail in the coffin, starting with today, going on to Sondland, I think that those numbers will increase and put real pressure on the Republicans facing re-election. I do think, though, that we may be misunderstanding Lindsey Graham when he says it's hearsay. What he meant to say is the witnesses say they heard him say it on the speakerphone. Yeah. It was hearsay. They heard him say it, and I think they've testified to that.
But now that that's the case, you know, it's Lindsey's new defense. I think it was Aristotle who said, see no evil, hear no evil, say no evil. Right. I mean, he just does not want to know anything. It's really...
Won't read the transcripts, doesn't want to hear testimony. No.
Not going to do it, not going to do it. So, Willie, I do think it's telling. One of the frustrating things for me, and I think for a lot of us this past week, is you've had people talking about how, some people saying early on that these hearings weren't compelling enough. I think they're as compelling and thoughtful and important as any hearings we've had in a very long time in Washington, D.C. But secondly, people say, oh, you know, there's a fait accompli. We know how this is going to end. You never know how a trial is going to end. You never know how hearings like this are going to end. If that was a press's opinion back in 1970, late 72, 73, we would have never gotten to 74. We would have never gotten to the tapes. Nixon would have never been forced to resign for his crimes. In this case, let's look at the poll. 70% of Americans say what Donald Trump did is wrong. 70%. Only 1 in 4 think what he did was okay. That means all of Donald's lies, all of Donald's tweets, all of Donald's witness intimidation, all of Donald's abuse of people who work for him, all of it is being ignored by a good chunk of his supporters. I mean, he's got like a 42, 43% approval rating. Well, 70% of Americans say, Donald, what you have done is wrong.
Yeah.
And that, I think everybody should just hold their fire, and we actually let the evidence play out before people make their declarations that nothing's